So if I talk right here, and then that should pick up enough, and yeah, yeah. You want me to? No.
Try talking now.
Okay. If I talk like this, can you hear me?
Keep going.
If I talk like this, can you hear me? Do you need me to move closer to the mic like this? Oh, that's
Not too close.
not too close. Okay. How's this? Move the microphone closer. So I have like 2 inches. I better not move, right? I need to stand right here.
Well,
Okay.
you should be able to move around.
Okay. There's a bit of feedback in the room, which might. I don't need a monitor to hear myself or anything. That's not what that is. Okay. Okay. Well, I can do that on mic if that's okay. I mean, I would just. Yeah, maybe we should talk in the mic. Maybe we should turn the mic off. Try talking now. Try.
Just say something.
Okay, I'm just talking normally now. Woohoo!
Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. This is a test. How's the sound? Pretty good? Okay. Test, test, test. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Okay. Just make sure we don't have any weird static.
Oh, the switch is off.
Hey, I need assistance with my computer for a moment. I'm trying to get it to play the. Yes. So if I decay, it's not doing that. Sure, that's good. That's up. Yep, that's perfect. Yep. I just want to save that on my screen. Oh, okay, cool. 'Cause it wasn't doing this yesterday when I had it set up. But luckily it's not. Maybe. I hope not. That's my favorite thing. All right. If I use this, you can hear me. If I use this, you can hear me. Okay, the only thing I'm concerned about this is that I'm not skilled with a microphone and I may blow your eardrums out. So it's like, I'm definitely not going to sing. I like you all. I want you to stay and enjoy your day. I got forced into doing karaoke at the IA Summit last year and it was terrible. I had a couple beers. There is a constant hum. I would really, I want you guys to hear this, so I'm going to not use the microphone, and I would encourage anybody, please, to come forward. Yeah, this one's off, though. This one's off. Okay, if I do this. I'm sorry, do I need to turn this one off then? Okay. And I have to turn this one on. Okay, this is. Okay? I'm talking, and I'm still talking. Okay. Great. Let's try this, shall we? Okay. Well, good morning. Thanks for coming to World Information Architecture Day. Is the hum gonna go away, I hope? Okay, great. So I'm here to talk specifically about information architecture for an entire hour, and I'm hoping that's what you're all here for because that's what I'm going to do. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Jessie, and I work for the Understanding Group, and we're a consultancy based in Michigan that exclusively does information architecture. In fact, we're the world's only consultancy that's just focused on information architecture. And it's not just information architecture. I think we all kind of look at it in terms of we like to improve the world through information architecture. And since we're all so geeked about it, we like to do things like sponsor World IA Day and give talks as often as we can. So I appreciate you coming to me to evangelize for information architecture. So our little slogan is we make places made of information. And we've done it for a lot of different types of people, from large organizations to small nonprofits. So instead of giving you a bunch of credentials or my resume, I'd like to just introduce myself in terms of my involvement with World Information Architecture Day over the years. So as Joe mentioned at the beginning of the day, Joe and I were actually kind of the two people that got the whole ball rolling on this event back in 2012. So I was the executive director of the first event, and I'm really happy to see it scale from 14 cities to as worldwide as it is right now. The next year I spoke and I did a really fun talk with one of my best friends about taxonomy and how it's not scary and how everybody can do it. And it was fun. We got to act like clowns together. And I'm sad she's not here with me today. But the next year I went to Los Angeles and I participated in that event as a sponsor. And then last year I actually did what was probably the most amazing thing ever. I sat at home in my pajamas and I watched the live stream and I woke up and I joined a talk in Sweden. And then I hopped over to London, and then I went to New York, and I ended the day in Los Angeles. So I got to get a sampling. That's one of the beauties of these days. While you can come together and get these local connections, you can also kind of witness the conversation that's going on across the globe, no matter if you're in a city that's hosting an event or not. So this year, obviously, I'm here to be speaking. I have to say this is the scariest of all of the engagements I've had with World Information Architecture Day because I'm up here, and I have to be responsible for the things I say. So here I go. I want to, first of all, thank Joe Elmendorf for putting together this event and inviting me to come speak. So thank you, Joe. This is the theme today, Information Everywhere, Architects Everywhere. And I took this as a direct invitation to come kind of get on my soapbox about some of the things, some of the big, deep thoughts I've been having about the interconnection between information architecture and traditional architecture. So I'm going to cover these questions today. What is IA and how do we explain it? What metaphors do we use when we're explaining information architecture? What are some of the limitations behind these popular metaphors? And how can we expand the metaphors that we currently use to better help us make places made of information for people? So let's start first with what is IA? There's a really long time standing debate about how we define information architecture. And within the field, we call it affectionately defining the damn thing, because this has been going on for 20 years, and everybody you talk to is going to have a different definition and a different way of looking at this because it is an emerging field. So a lot of thought leaders have put their thoughts into the ring, and I'm not going to project my own thoughts in any way. I'm going to more walk you through some of the working definitions that I've enjoyed using over the years. So first of all, these are my fancy definitions. So these are things that I'll use when I'm having debates with other practitioners or when I'm talking with clients who are particularly well-informed and well-versed already. The Information Architecture Institute has 3 definitions on their website, so I'm going to start there. Since they're putting on the event, I think they get to define the term for at least the first, they get the leader position. Websites, intranets, online communities, and software to support usability and findability. The other one is more about the nature of the community of people that it's doing, or that are doing information architecture. An emerging community of practice focused on bringing principles of design and architecture to the digital landscape. So it's interesting because one of their definitions even includes the word architecture in it. So we already can see where the theme came from. There's another fancy definition that I like to use when I'm getting really thinky, and this is Jorge Aranjo. He's one of the co-authors of the new version of the Polar Bear book. I'm not sure, how many of you are familiar with the Polar Bear book? Okay, great. So there's a fourth edition that just got released, and Jorge is the voice that's been invited to change the conversation to meet the needs of information environments today. And what he says is information architecture is the structural integrity of meaning across contexts. So what you're looking at is, does the information mean the same thing? Does it have structures that allow it to mean the same thing? And does it have shared meaning across different contexts where you may be using some of the same information? So you're looking at Internet of Things, cross-channel, digital spaces that interface with analog spaces, all sorts of different things. So if you start to unpack these, you're already seeing how deep this conversation can go. At the Understanding Group, we use this diagram a lot, and we like to say that there's kind of three different things that overlap in information architecture. And first, you have the ontology. What is the actual meaning of the thing that we're talking about? Then the taxonomy, what are the specific parts and how do they relate to each other? And then you have the choreography. How do we get people to move through these spaces and these structures that we create so they can find their own meaning and make meaning within these spaces? So again, these are pretty heady. And I would assume that a lot of us in here are practitioners, so these are probably within most of our grasp. That said, Joe said something funny at the beginning of the day where he said, my mom still doesn't even know what I do. And I think that's true for a lot of us. So when we find ourselves talking to people outside of our field, we've got some more accessible ways to talk about information architecture. In layman's terms, we create places made of information. That's what we do. We create places, they're made of information. So the top there is a picture of, I believe, the inside of a Best Buy. And that's an information environment. There's information on the signs, and there's information on the labels, there's information in the people that are working there that you can get, so that's an information environment. And it's a cross-channel information environment. Same thing with an online store. There's all sorts of different types of information, and the way that it's structured and presented allows us to make sense of the place that we're in. Another thing we like to say is that we create better user experiences for people through the strategic organization of information. So user experience is a big buzzword that people like to use, and we see information architecture as a core of making good user experiences. And the last thing I like to say, if I'm talking to somebody on an airplane, I say, I help websites not suck. That's it. But so there's all these definitions, and very rarely are you in conversation where you're sitting there and you need to like rote memory blurt out some definition. That's just not how things work. So there's other ways that we talk about information architecture, especially with people who are either new to the field or they're practicing it, but they don't even realize that they're actually the information architect on the project or service that they're working on. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll talk about examples of work or case studies. So in this project I did this, in that project I did that, and then at the end this was the result. So case studies are a good way to explain what I do. Sometimes I find other practitioners talking a lot about their output. In terms of the thinking they do, they say, well, I do a bunch of thinking, and then at the end, I'm giving you deliverables. I'll make you sitemaps, wireframes, personas, user journeys, content maps, roadmaps, things like that. Yet another way some people choose to talk about information architecture is through a process that they find particularly helpful. And every practitioner or consultancy is going to have their own approach. This is a process we use at the Understanding Group that I think is really helpful. It's called the PASS model. And basically we've got programming, analysis, synthesis, and specification. And it's a really fancy way of saying, first we understand the business needs or organizational needs. Then we understand what the user's needs are. And then we work together with our clients to strategically create a place that actually makes sense and gets the things done that need to get done. And then we create any sort of documentation that needs to help the design and development team take the architectures and actually build the place that we're suggesting needs to be built. So another way, and I'm trying to be exhaustive here because it is Information Architecture Day, and I realize that this might be a new topic for some of you. For some of you, this is covering old ground, and that's okay because I promise we'll get to something that's not something you've heard before. So another way that people like to talk about information architecture is through modeling, because often modeling is one of the key components of the work that we must do. Some people put information architecture as part of the entire landscape of user experience design, which is what you see on here over on the left. Other people put information architecture in layers in between other professional capabilities and responsibilities. And yet other models actually are more self-referential and just describe this is what's important in information architecture. So I personally, as a practitioner, find value in looking at these models, but that said, I haven't found one yet that I have been 100% happy with. So the way that I like to talk to people about information architecture particularly is through anecdotes and metaphors. I like telling funny stories, and I like getting people to connect with what I'm talking about. So this is the floor plan of the house I used to live in on weekends. I'd go visit my mom every other weekend, and this was her house. So I spent time in this house from the time that I was 12 to 17. So that's the front elevation of the house. It's in Wyoming, Michigan, for any of you Michiganders here. So let's look at a use case. Mom has to do laundry. So mom has to grab all the stuff from her bedroom, walk through the hallway, through the kids' room, down the stairs to the laundry. Okay? Pretty basic. Use case, mom has to go get groceries. So mom goes from the living room, she picks up her keys in the office, she flows through the hallway, goes through the gauntlet of doors, out to the driveway, into the garage, she goes to get the groceries. Use case, mom comes back from the grocery store and she needs to put the groceries in the kitchen. So she goes through the gauntlet of doors again, and she puts the groceries away. So can you see the problem here? I mean, besides the fact that mom had been doing all the work and nobody else was helping. So actually, my teenage bedroom was a hallway, right? And that is due to the nature of the structure, the architecture of the place that I was living in. So as a teenager, I kind of lacked privacy in that weird space that I needed to become an adult. And my mom's workflows were impeded by having to constantly go through a room that was actually a hallway. So it kind of, I was only there every other weekend, so it wasn't like it was a big territorial battle, but it was definitely frustrating. So I like to use this story to say, I help make sure that this kind of crazy placemaking and wayfinding and flows don't happen in the digital space, right? Because no amount of like cool bedspreads or neat posters on my wall were going to make my room not a hallway, right? So no amount of visual design is going to make your website or app or system or service make any sense if it's poorly architected. So I just did an example of a metaphor, and there are a lot of metaphors that practitioners use across information architecture to explain what we do. Again, information architecture is a field that's relatively new, and it can be hard to explain. So sometimes we need to use other things to explain a little bit more in depth what we do. So I really like this quote. This was in a kind of canonical information architecture text called Pervasive Information Architecture by Andrea Resmini and Luca Rosati. And I think it gets at explaining why metaphors help us, especially at this stage of maturity of the practice. This is why metaphors help us explain what we're doing. And I'll just read the quote. The metaphors we use constantly in our everyday language profoundly influence what we do because they shape our understanding. They help us describe and explore new ideas and terms and concepts found in more familiar domains. So what I want to walk you through is some familiar domains that other practitioners use to explain information architecture. But before I do that, I'm going to take a sip of water. Who knows what this is? Where is this? Anybody seen this before? It's in London. Yeah, it's King's Cross. So King's Cross is a massive, massive transit hub in London. And my husband and I got to visit there a couple years ago when we were traveling. And I remember walking in and I was just completely overwhelmed because there was so much information. I had no idea where to look. There was a giant train ticker above the top, which was distractingly inserted with ads. There were center columns that also had duplicated information. There were kiosks. There were wayfinding signs. There were signs that you can't really see it because this is the commercial area, but underneath this bar here and over to the back are actually the train terminals where there was other conflicting information. So a lot of times information architects will talk about transit hubs as a really good metaphor for what we do in the digital world in terms of, there's context is really important. Information hierarchy, controlled vocabularies, integrated systems of words, signage, and finding aids. So what the people who design these spaces do and how lost you can feel in these places is very similar to what we do as information architects in the digital world. And by thinking about words and language and hierarchies, we can make sure that it's clear to people how they navigate and what kind of place they're in and how they get through it. So, but contrary to popular belief, information architecture is not just always about words or taxonomies or navigation or controlled vocabularies. So this leads me to another metaphor. The information architect is the tailor. So my friend and mentor and the co-founder of the Understanding Group, Dan Klein, he's kind of an information architecture heavyweight. He wrote a really cool article about how he was starting to see information architecture, the role that we do as information architects as that akin to that of the tailor. So I'm going to read a quote from a lecture that he had. Your project is a piece of cloth. Architecture is where the cuts go. Architects hold the scissors. Design, on the other hand, so not architecture, the thing that happens after architecture, design is making the resulting parts be the best parts they can be and solving the problems defined in the act of cutting. When information architects do their metaphorical scissors work, and when they do it well, they set user experience, interaction, and graphic designers up for success. So through this metaphor, you can see the crucial role of strategy in a lot of what we do in information architecture. Another thing is that people have reported using is that of the information architect as the conductor. So information architects can often be at the center of a project, and the information architect can be responsible for coordinating thought and alignment between the stakeholders, working with the users to understand user needs, working with the visual designers and the content strategists, and then at the end ensuring that the developers actually build the place that is intended to be built. So does this sound like another role to anybody? Does this sound like, do we have any product managers in the room? Yeah, so this sounds probably pretty similar to a lot of what you're doing. So do information architects take on the role of product managers? In the absence of a product manager, yeah, they do. And conversely, a lot of times product managers are the ones that are doing the information architecture. I see nods of agreement. And this is the same with any role, right? Because sometimes your title might be user experience architect or user experience designer. And in the absence of an information architect, you're actually on the line for creating these places and making these ideas about the structural integrity of meaning across contexts. So, there's a lot of other metaphors that I could talk about. But for the sake of keeping the day on track, I want to move into the one that I'm going to be spending most of the time talking about. So let's look at one more metaphor. The built world is probably the most prevalent metaphor that people use when they're explaining information architecture. So as you can see, the anecdote about my mom's house when I was a kid being, my bedroom being a hallway and the weirdness of it. This is a picture of Ronchamp. This is a church by the noted 20th century architect Le Corbusier. There, I had to slow down to say it because I always just gnarl it up. And you can see here, floor plans lead to elevation drawings, lead to maquettes or models, lead to the actual drawn, designed, real building in real space and time. In a similar way, you could say information architects might create a strategic brief, which would lead to a site map, which would lead to annotated wireframes, which would lead to the actual construction of a website. So we use this metaphor quite a bit at the Understanding Group. And our main value proposition is that organizations can expect better user experience for their customers if they start with information architecture. So the thing we say is architect before you build. We say that quite a bit. And we're in good company with this in terms of other practitioners have been using this for a really long time. So the reason to work with an architect is to make places, not just spaces. And if you do it correctly, information architects create places where strategy shapes the structures that ensure a good fit between what you intend the place to be and actually how people experience it. So if you look, this church was designed, and here are some thoughts on the outside and the inside and the floor plan. And this is the structure that dictates the experience. So when you go in, you experience this church in a very profound and mystical way. I've never been there, but people who have been there have said it's amazing. So a couple of months ago, I was curious about this use of this metaphor. I was just thinking in my own head, how many other people do this? Is this popular? Is this even valid? And I wanted to understand some of the strengths and weaknesses of this metaphor. So I put out a simple survey to all of my practitioner friends, and I got some good insight. So I got 80 responses to my first round of the survey, and of those 80 responses, 65% of people said they either do or sometimes do use the built world as a metaphor for information architecture. So obviously it's not an exhaustive survey, but it's a good first look. So I want to give you some examples of how people use physical buildings to talk about information architecture. And I hear somebody here in the audience saying, that's what I do. So this is the Winchester Mystery House, and it's a sprawling mansion in California. And there's a lot of hearsay and legends, and one of the most colorful legends about this particular place is that it was owned by the widow of the Winchester gun empire. So the Winchester gun empire guy died, left this giant mansion to his wife, and the wife was into rooms for them to stay in, they're going to kill you. So through some sort of pathology, she decided that she had to continually build on what once had been a completely functioning estate, and it just kind of turned into this, like, I'm going to refrain from profanity, but I have a couple of words that I could use to describe this. It's basically crazy. So if you look at this in totality, there's no rhyme, reason, or plan to many of the structures in this building. So a lot of times if you're in this house and you go and take a tour, you're going to find places that are confusing within the house. You're going to find places that are uncomfortable and innavigable. You can't get around. So this is a really good way for us to talk about information architecture metaphorically, because it shows the importance of wayfinding, of architecting before you build, thinking about the what before the how. So how many of you in here have worked on sites or systems where it's just, I know, let's add a microsite. I know, let's add a subdomain. I know, let's just add okay, so how many of you have worked on the digital equivalent of a Winchester Mystery House? Yes, okay, so this is not an uncommon problem. And so basically what started off as a reasonable and useful endeavor kind of spiraled into a menacing monster of a non-place. So information architecture can help us get away from some of those things. So that's a really super hard to see picture, but what that is a staircase that goes to a ceiling on the left. It just is a staircase that goes to a ceiling. So a dead-end staircase, metaphorically, is kind of like an information page with no CTA on an e-commerce site. So you get there and you're like, cool, information. What do I do now? Nothing. Thank you, staircase. There's parts of the houses that you just simply can't get to. That's a staircase that runs into a wall with another staircase that runs into a wall. This is basically like navigation that makes no sense. Thanks for taking me here. Why am I here? What do I do now? Nothing? Great. There's also hard to traverse hallways that lead to rooms that have no function and context. And that's kind of, if I was going to put a metaphor to that, I'd say it's like search and filters that give you really useless results back. So do I think the built world is an apt metaphor? Yeah, I do. And so as you can see, like much of what we do as information architects isn't just making up taxonomies or testing navigation structures or sketching up wireframes. It's really much more thinking about the type of place we want to build and why we want to build it. So another thing that's particularly important to me is to build durable, stable structures that help people feel safer and that solve problems. Anybody recognize this clip? It's from a movie, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So I like to build places that are durable and scalable and sustainable, not rickety messes that fall apart under a couple of years of use. So if you think about information architecture as the frame of your information environment, and you understand that your information environment is only going to be as good as your foundational elements, you're going to be able to architect a durable, sustainable, and useful place that hopefully will scale well over time. So I see Tom left the room, but there's a guy here named Tom Elmendorf who's Joe's brother, and he's a local Milwaukee person. And I asked Tom to give me some examples of really great local Milwaukee architecture. And these are some of the things he brought back to me. So I just want you to ponder as you're looking at these places that hopefully are somewhat familiar to you as people who live in the area. What are these places for? Who are they for? What are the people going to do there once they get there? And how do you know that from the structure? How does the structure let you know where you're going to be? I think maybe an even more important question would be which of these places, if any of them, get you excited about making a place? If you're going to build a website that really was the place that you want your customers or your users to be, which one would it most likely be like and why? So I just wanted to throw those out there to kind of get you thinking. So that's the introduction of what information architecture is and some common metaphors that we talk about. But now I want to look at some strengths and limitations of the built world model, right? Because a metaphor should be, I think, considered if we're going to rely on it to discuss the work that we do together. So again, I asked 80 people via the survey, if you use physical architecture as a metaphor to describe information architecture, what strengths or limitations have you found? And I got back some great answers. So first, the strengths. All humans have experiences, positive and negative, in built spaces. So it's easy to talk to them about something they already understand. User needs are really important in both digital and physical architecture. Same with understanding the workflows that the space needs to accommodate and creating wayfinding that allows people to navigate through those places in a meaningful and logical, safe feeling way. There's a seemingly easy way to map user professions to architecture. So if I'm an information architect, I'm like the architect on a project, but my development team is like my foreman and my builders that actually get it done. So I don't actually build it, someone else builds it, but I just make the plan. I don't make it look pretty like an interior designer would do. An interior designer is like a visual designer or an interaction designer. And then context is really important in both. So from the examples and from this list, you can see there are some strengths to using this. There's also some limitations in terms of where does this metaphor break down? Not everyone's familiar with architecture, and actually sometimes talking about something so lofty can really put people out. If you talk about it in the wrong way, people can start to feel isolated and like you're talking down to them. And so I've actually seen practitioners start to use architectural examples that really bum people out and make them feel isolated and like, this isn't the conversation for me, and I don't want to talk to you. So you have to be careful about that. Another one that was pointed out is that architecture is a licensed profession where anyone at this point can be an information architect. And there are a lot of us that are information architects, and we don't even realize we're doing it. I don't think anybody accidentally architects a building, but I could be wrong. There's a lot of misalignments between physical spaces and websites too. I mean, just the fact that physical spaces have to follow physics and websites don't. You can zoom through and portal through websites in ways that you can't, at least at this point in time, through physical spaces. And time takes on a different meaning too. When you talk about a website that's lasted for a long time, 3 to 5 years is kind of a good go for most websites, whereas ideally the buildings that we make, if we're looking at it from a sustainability perspective, they should last for over 100 years or more. The last quote that I think is really great comes again from Jorge Aranjo, who's a person that you should definitely put down on your list of people to look up his work. The objective of IA is not the production of environments for inhabitation, rather environments for understanding. So it's we are inhabiting the spaces, but more in an abstract mental model kind of way, as opposed to physically being in there. So this leads me to a hypothesis, and bear with me because this is where I start to go off the rails and get weird. Hypothesis number one I had after doing all this thinking was that the discussion of information architecture uses a lot of built world examples, and we have a lot of conversations, and they're all really reliant and largely referential to examples from Western architecture from the past 100 years. And so, as an aside to anybody in the audience who's an architectural buff, when I say that, I'm not referring specifically to the school or style of architecture most commonly associated with modernism. I'm meaning modern, postmodern, post-postmodern, arts and crafts, anything basically that happened in the 20th century and the early 21st century. So I'm thinking there's this over-reliance on these models that are from a very specific vantage point. Am I onto something, or am I just on my soapbox waving my hands around? So like any good researcher, I decided, again, I'd collect some data. With my initial survey, I asked people to list out the types of physical architecture that they're most likely to refer to in terms of what architects or work of architecture or time periods or themes do you reference when you're explaining or discussing information architecture? So survey says, this is a word bubble of everything that came back. I just threw it into Wordle, so I didn't do anything special. But it shows the kind of relational weight of the terms that came back. So what patterns do you see? Do you see the Winchester Mystery House or house in there? Really big? Yeah. Any other things? Yes, thank you for helping me. Okay. So this is falling water, and people use it a lot to talk about how important context is. This building is situated absolutely beautifully in the landscape it's in. And it shows us how the places that we should make ideally should integrate with a larger environment or ecosystem in which it exists. But it's not just all beautiful pictures of modern architecture. People also talk about how this building is falling apart because of arrogant design at expense of stable structure. It's falling apart a lot sooner than it really should be, given how recently it had been built. This is another one. This is Lou Kahn, the Salk Institute in San Diego, California. People use this a lot when they're talking about information architecture. It's another brutalist favorite. And I did visit this place in person, and it was absolutely completely magical, and I loved it. But I don't want to talk about something I really liked. I want to talk about something that makes me mad. This is Le Corbusier, Villa Savoy. He's the same architect that was behind the church that I referenced earlier. And so he's definitely made some beautiful places that, as information architects, we can use metaphorically to talk about the importance of how planning can lead to delightful spaces. But Le Corbusier has also said a lot of like wacky stuff, like houses are machines for living in. I don't know, to me as a mammal, that seems strange that I would want to be expected to live in a machine. I'm not okay with that. Architectural critics, so this is where I start to like get real hand wavy over here. Architectural critics have suggested that his take on how cities and buildings should be constructed were actually really destructive in terms of setting up people to be alienated from one another, elevating the use of the car over the foot, and kind of isolating different social and economic groups from one another. Some people have taken Le Corbusier's designs and plans and structures and even kind of attached to systemic racism, as some of his housing projects really took little account for the actual needs of the people that he was supposedly supposed to be serving. A really great quote that I liked was that he had a utopian vision that became pathological in practice. And I thought that was okay. A couple more things. This is also strange. He was a known fascist, and he at one point was working for Mussolini. So, okay, I'm done beating up on this guy. Let's go to the next guy. So this is Frank Gehry, Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. And a lot of people use Frank Gehry as a person that they use to talk about information architecture. And this is a matter of personal preference, but it's my talk, so I can say what I want. And I hate this building, and I hate the place it makes. I really feel like Gehry is an example of a starchitect who just kind of makes whatever he wants in whatever space he's given to fill. I've witnessed his business or his buildings in Barcelona and in Los Angeles and in Chicago, and I've had the same feeling interacting with these buildings and all these spaces. So to me, if I want to think about how do I tie this metaphorically to information architecture, I'd say this is kind of like a digital or branding agency that prioritizes a really flashy visual design and branding over any sort of planned information architecture, and ends up with a really sexy, trendy, award-winning website that completely caves in on itself after a year and makes no sense and is useless, and then tons of budget has to go into rebuilding it again. So that's what I think. Maybe I'm just cranky. So there's some of the most popular buildings that people use, according to that. And I said, well, what about the writings of our field? Like maybe I'm missing something. I want to do an exhaustive investigation of this before I get up in front of everybody and talk about how terrible everything is. And I looked at books and literature and journals around information architecture, and I noticed the same patterns, really. We really talk about typical architecture from the past 100 years, and we mostly talk about it from the Western world. So I love this image here. It's a recent image, I think, from the late 2000, maybe it's 2008. It's in the corner in the bottom. This is a map of all of the architectures of the 20th century kind of in relationship to one another. And all the areas in blue are the things that I was able to pull out references from that I heard in information architecture. And I'm not really surprised to find that most of our examples are from can be found on this chart. So, what's wrong with that? Those buildings are cool, right? And they help us explain what we do in ways that just talking about the work doesn't really get across. So, I have a hypothesis. So hypothesis 1 checks out, right? That a lot of our examples are from the past 100 years. They've got a Western bent to them. They're kind of myopic in view. So it checks out, and I have another hypothesis. I think this is problematic. I really do. And this is where I get super weird and maybe a little pedantic or dogmatic. You can probably already pick up on my distaste for modern, postmodern, contemporary, and typical architecture. But I have some reasons, and I'd like to share them with you, so please bear with me. First, the lack of diversity of this sample is blindingly obvious. So that's Frank Gehry, Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and Lou Kahn, the 4 guys that we showed the buildings of. So where are the ladies? Did you see any ladies in that mind map bubble? No, I didn't see them either. Where are the people of color? Were there any? Are there any in the models that we've talked about? No. How about indigenous people? How about First Nations people that were there before the architects came in? No, none of those either. How about even, let's just go for an easy one, non-Western patterns and structures. Anything? No. So what does that mean when we lose these voices from our example pool, right? What does that mean? What happens when the systems that we revere and that we refer to so often are devoid of so many voices? I mean, has this ever worked out poorly before? Has anyone? If we don't build systems and structures and patterns and think about placemaking with all of these different perspectives in mind, we're missing out on quite a bit of things. So I've got another kind of scathing indictment of typical architecture, and I'd love to read this whole quote to you, but that's kind of poor talk form, so I'm not going to. I'm going to invite you to scan the bolded words. I want to keep depression levels at this point hovering over only at moderate, so you can check this out later, but the gist of it is that a lot of the architectures that we're referencing are not sustainable and have actually been linked back to massive ecological issues through the use of fossil fuels. So I'd like to just say, like many of our websites that we build today, they last 2 to 4 years maximum. A lot of for the impoverished community to figure out themselves. Now, is Le Corbusier the Walmart building? No, but the Walmart building wouldn't have been possible without Le Corbusier there in the first place, right? So there's a lot of other issues that are attached to some of the models that we commonly use as information architects to discuss our work. So the critique goes on. I love this quote. The problem is also that these structures lack an authentic connection to nature and the very cultures in which they exist. This in turn leaves us feeling disconnected, isolated, and longing for true connections to each other and to our communities. So this is about the built world. And if we agree to this metaphor, could we hear this as a criticism of ourselves who create places for humans today? Yes? No? Maybe? I mean, if you think about Susan's talk from this morning, the people that are coming up are not only using these systems, they're spending a lot more of their time in these systems from a young age. And that's going to have a huge, like Susan mentioned, a huge impact on the types of people that we're creating and we're growing. So I'm getting close to being done with the sad panda bit of my talk, and I promise it'll go up from here. But I want to just give you guys a little more information. So there's some actual architects in the field of built architecture, and notably one named Peter Buchanan. And he's the author of this journal series that came out through the Architectural Review called The Big Rethink, where basically it's just a stern condemnation of the patterns and systems and strategies that have been driving architecture over the past 100 years. And I really think if you are practicing information architecture, or if you're making places for other people, you might want to check out this article series because it's really, really, it's hard to read and it's really, really informative and inspiring, I think, as a practitioner, as a person who makes places for other people. So Again, I'm not going to read the quote to you, but if you scan the words, it's a bummer. It's a total bummer. So this is, I promise, getting really close to the end. And I don't think it's fair to blame the collapse of our ecosystem and ecology and economy on architecture, for sure. I'm not saying that at all. But I think if we pay attention to the emerging critique of these places, there's an increasing call to get involved and be part of the solution. So if you look, some of these things, we need to think about, are we creating places that are like this or that are not like this? So I'm done with a soapbox. What I'd like to do is close this little section of the talk with looking at some inferred and explicit values of the types of structures and buildings that we're most likely to be referencing currently in our discussion of information architecture metaphorically. So what were the values, right? Because you have to remember, this was a utopian dream. This was based on democracy. Really, the people that started this had good things in their heart when they started to do it. And they said, it's universal. It's leading to independence. It's uniform. Everybody's equal. It's egalitarian. It's efficient. Economy. If we use these materials, we're going to save a lot of money. It's going to be great for budgets. It's about industry. It's about machines. It's about getting everything working efficiently and working together and being universal. And it's mass produced. And the materials that we have that we can use now as a result of all of the technology innovation through the war, great, these technologies are awesome, let's use these things. So I'm not getting up here and saying that these people were sitting here like making these buildings, how can I ruin the world? That's not what they were doing. But they were only looking at a small swath of types of things that we need to consider when we're making places. So I agree with this. And this is, again, Jorge Aranjo, a really great information architect who was coincidentally trained as a other kind of architect. And he says, as the field matures, meaning information architecture, and as more of our daily interactions involve information environments, we must become also increasingly proactive in our role as agents of cultural and political change. So he's calling upon us to make choices about the places we make that can positively impact the world. So this leads me to the last bit of my conversation today. I think there's room for improvement, and I have a hunch. But first, I want to walk you through a little bit of story time. This is your unicorn chaser for all the gloom and doom I just put you through in the last part of the talk. My husband and I took some time off to travel, and by sheer happenstance, we ended up in this beautiful place. This is a beautiful handmade earthen cob house in British Columbia, Canada, off the coast of Vancouver. And we spent, I believe, 6 weeks in this place, and we felt amazing. And it was like unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I felt calm, which I'm typically not a calm person. I felt peaceful. I felt whole. I felt healthy, and I felt connected. I felt connected to myself. I felt connected to my husband. I felt connected to the rest of the world. This kind of sounds stupid, but the earth was hugging the house, and the house was hugging me. And so before I spent time in the cabin, I was basically this guy. And I mean, you can ask my husband, he's here, it's totally true. I was kind of a jerk. And after I spent time in the house, I'm basically this guy now. And that's a baby sloth, and his name is Sebastian. You should also Google him, because he will make your day. So simply put, being in this place, this is the downstairs, the living room of the place, it was transformative. And I started to think, how could being in a place that could have like this much impact on me, like how is this happening? And over time it came to me that the values of the place I were in were directly impacting the values that I had as a person. Christina Wadke, another awesome information architect, and you should definitely look her up too, she made this comment at Midwest UX a couple years ago, and now I finally understand what she means. And what she said was, places make us who we are. And I have really tangible, palpable proof that this is true. So in the interest of seeing behind the curtain of how these beautiful and welcoming places have been made, I've been dabbling in the dark arts of natural building. This is me. For those of you who are into puns, I have got popcorn, and I'm standing on a pile of cob. So yes, that is corn on the cob. I'm working on calling some principles from natural building and thinking about how they apply to the work I do as an information architect. And pardon the pun, but my ideas are still quite muddy. Which leads me to my third hypothesis. We can learn a lot and become better practitioners of information architecture by expanding our metaphors and the architectural examples that we reference. So for the first time in my life, like I mentioned, I was in this beautiful place that really changed who I was. And I was in a place that had values that were very counter to the other environments in which I had been traditionally experiencing as a person who spent most of my time in urban and suburban structures and places. So I thought about, what are these values that I'm starting to pick up on by being in this house? So here's a list. It was local. It was interdependent. This was all made by local materials. It was made by local communities. They didn't bring in experts from outside. It was integrated with the earth. Quality was of absolutely the highest. It was very slow. It's kind of like the slow food movement. Everybody gets together, everybody pitches in what they can do, and everybody has a role. All the way from the youngest kids to the oldest people in the community, everybody can be part of a house raising or barn raising in the natural building community. It's affordable. You can make these houses for a couple $1,000, really, if you're planning and you're doing things and you're thinking, right? You're planning before you build it. They're handmade. They're really bespoke to the needs of the people that are going to be inhabiting it. And it really focuses on ideas and people over profit or materials. So, and I think the best thing about all of this is that we can start to include these values in the work we do in digital placemaking. So I want to think about and go over some examples with you guys of natural and indigenous architecture that I think we could start to add to our conversations of the metaphor of the built world informing the digital places we make. So I think it's important to note before we go on, natural building is really just a resurgence of ancient architectural wisdom. Modern natural builders like me, we don't get a ton of credit for innovation. We only get credit for resurfacing things that are already tried and true across the world. People have been architecting their own wonderful human-centered places for generations. And perhaps in some ways, in order to move forward, we need to look back. So this is a great example. This is the Taos Pueblo, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the oldest continually inhabited structure in North America, and it's been housing families and commerce and religion and culture for over 1,000 years. Yes, 1,000 years people have been living in this same structure. It's contextually relevant, it's human-centered, it's sustainable, it's evolving, and it's just absolutely lovely. Another example, to go to a non-Western example, these are the Musqueam huts of Cameroon. Again, very similar to the Taos Pueblo. It's very contextually relevant. All of these places are made by the community. Any sort of ornament on there you can see on the side that's ornament, those are actually built-in ladders to help with repair that needs to happen over the rains and over the winds. So again, they become sustainable. They're also scalable. Family structures change a lot in this particular community, and they needed to build structures that were kind of like the websites or places we make. They need to be able to scale and change based on the needs and growth of the community. So what I'm saying is the models that we most typically reference right now, those typical modernist examples, we're only getting half of the picture. And I think if we're going to continue to use the built world as a metaphor that we use to describe the work we do and to think about the places we're making, I just think we need to consider and expand our collection of reference materials. So I'm not being a total technophobe here. I'm not saying like burn down Frank Lloyd Wright and torch Frank Gehry, though. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. I just think it's important for us to consider both of these sets of values. Neither of these sets of values is inherently better or worse than the other. It's just more important that we need to pause and think about the implications on being overly reliant on one set of the values or the other. So again, we're finding these architects having these conversations and owning part of the problem of the modern world. And I would encourage you as all of people who are making places to think about how can you learn from the architects and go forward and make places that actually are going to be part of the solution. So maybe a more academically rigorous way to approach this idea is to just say, to be better information architects, why don't we even just look at where architecture is going right now? Remember the graph at the beginning where I showed where everything is? You see that little bottom corner? There are things in this little area that say things like sustainability movement, natural capitalism, world village, internet. So what does that look like? What does that look like for us as people who make digital places, and what does this look like in the built world? So I'd like to argue that the best architecture in the world right now is taking a look at both sets of the values that I showed you on that earlier graphic, and then they're choosing when to prioritize one set of values or one bit of piece of value from one side intentionally and with purpose. And so I'm also going to go out on a limb and say that the best architecture today seeks to meet not only the needs of the organization that's paying for it and the users that are going to be using it, but then it's also looking to say, how can I step out of my immediate problem set, and how can I actually start to be part of the solution for the problems that we're facing as the entire system we're all situated in. So how can I solve some of the issues of being on this earth? How can I solve some of the problems of being a human? And these are really core to what we're supposed to be doing, I think, together to make the world a better place. This is the visitor center at the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland. It's very recently built, and it's half machine concrete and glass, and it's half buried into the earth. And it's really quite beautiful. And it's sustainable. It's done a lot to revitalize the area. It's very usable. It's very sustainable, and it's lovely. And I think it's a great example of taking some values from one column and some values from the other column very intentionally. This is another example. I go back again to New Mexico. These are the earth ships of Taos, New Mexico. And what you're finding is a blending of earth building with technology. It's essentially the same thing as a natural building where there's cob, but the earth ship builders are looking around and saying, oh, what's a huge problem? Well, waste and petrochemicals is a huge problem. So why don't we take all of these tires that are being thrown away in landfills, ram them with earth, and build up around them? Why don't we take all the glass that's not being recycled and it's just thrown out on the mesa here and gather it and make stained glass windows with it? Why don't we go one step further and build smart, data-driven systems within here to operationalize and make the energy use and water use of this place as efficient as possible? They're really, really great structures that, again, I think show the blending of both the natural building and indigenous values with some of the values from modernism. This is very scalable. This is very material-centric. It's very, very mass-producible. So I'm just going to give one more. This is David Ajayi's memo, which is the Mass Extinction Memorial Observatory. And you can't really tell from this picture what it is, but it's essentially a tower of rock from a local quarry built up on a hill in a cylindrical, spiraling monument. And it's a monument to the fact that we're going through one of the largest mass extinctions that the Earth has ever seen throughout eons. And what this piece of architecture is doing is it's calling attention to this massive issue that we're all facing. And it's trying to engage people in the local community and in the global community through architecture, sustainable, beautiful, earthbound architecture, into thinking in a forward-thinking way. And I would definitely Google this project and check out some of the information on it. Coincidentally, David Ajayi is also the architect who architected the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C., and I got to walk by that. It was pretty cool. This is a guy to watch. So if the other architects are doing it, I think we should be doing it too. So I'm challenging all of you in this room to consider your metaphors. What are their benefits? What are the limitations of the metaphors you use? And how might you expand your metaphors to be a better practitioner and a person who makes better places for people to live in? So now I get to brag a little bit. At the Understanding Group, I think one of the biggest things that we do differently than other consultancies and other UX teams I've worked with is that we often prioritize the values on the left. Not at the expense or total abandonment of the values on the right, but there's definitely a slight tip to the left. And that's why I work there. Because while we're practicing information architecture, we don't just see ourselves as people making websites. We see ourselves as people making places that can make people feel good. Places where people are successful, where they're happy, where they feel welcome, where they feel safe, and where they feel valued. What we do as information architects, if we do it well, will be part of the solution to some of the world's big wicked problems. So these are some parting words from Brenda Laurel last year at the Information Architecture Summit. And I'm going to read this quote because it's gorgeous. If we take it up as a goal, it will spread like fire to other minds and other fields. Information architects should adopt this as a goal. We are uniquely qualified to get it done, so let's do it. How might you do this besides expanding your metaphor? I hate talks who set out to give you this big theoretical feel-good idea, and then they give you nothing to work with, so I'm not going to do that to you. there are some ways that you can build your skill sets around some of these ideas. There are practitioners in the field that are taking actual steps towards thinking about how can we take these big ideas and make them reality. This is a workshop Dan Klein is giving at the IA Summit this year in Atlanta in May, I believe. And he's exploring the work of Christopher Alexander. So Christopher Alexander is another architect who was really, really disliked by the modernists and postmodernists because he got in there and said some of the things that I'm saying to you right now. There are pattern languages, and there are things that are common across all cultures, across all time, that create places that have a quality without a name, which is a fancy way of saying places that people like to be in. So Dan's workshop is looking at how do we take the strategies that the architect Christopher Alexander used in building these great places, and how do we apply them to our digital work. So I definitely suggest you check that out. For those of you who are not really wanting to go pay a bunch of money to go to a workshop, that's super reasonable. Another thing you can do is just to read a little bit more in your off time. There's a couple of books, Understanding Context, Making Sense of Any Mess, which you all have now, so that's great. You can read that. And then so signing up for the Understanding Group's newsletter and blog, I think, is a good way to do. Yes, I'm plugging our newsletter, but the thing that I think is really cool about it is that we put stuff in there from all over the practice. So we do more of a curatorial service where we put together all the best articles on information architecture, placemaking, things like that. So sign up for that. That's great. I'd encourage you to read that Architectures article by Jorge, where he talks about the similarities between the physical world of architecture and the built world. I'd encourage you to check out the series of The Big Rethink by Peter Buchanan in the Architectural Review. I have some bootleg copies I can email you because you can only get them through library subscriptions. So if you really are wanting to check that out, drop me a note. And then I think another great book that I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list of things to read, is The Death and Life of the Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. She's a harsh critic of postmodern and modern architecture. And then if you're interested in the natural building thing, the book that I'm using in terms of pursuing my own desire to build a dirt hut in the forest is The Hand-Sculpted House by Ianto Evans. So that's it. I thank you so much for listening to my rant and my rally for hope and spending your Saturday here. And in the spirit of fostering local connections that eventually will have global impact, I just want to suggest a short lunch discussion topic for those of you who are meeting new people for the first time. So if you'd like to, I'd say you start here over your sandwiches. Discuss your most commonly used IA or UX metaphor. Identify a couple of strengths or weaknesses, and just talk about how you might and why you might choose to expand your metaphor in your conversation going forward. So that's it. If you have questions, I know it's lunchtime. I want to respect that. I'm happy to take your questions at lunch. You can come up and just talk to me. I'm on Twitter, but I frankly, I never use it. So the best thing to do would be just to email me directly. Follow the Understanding Group, or go to theunderstandinggroup.com and you can find my email address there. So thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate your attention. That's it. What?
2, 3. Test, test, test. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. This is a test. Everything sounds great. No static. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Regular talking voice. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing, testing. 1.
Okay, Jim, I'm talking to you. How does it sound? I'm going to move around the room, see if you can find the problem. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. WIAD 2016, lunch discussion. Discuss your most commonly used IA or UX metaphor. The front of the room. It's almost like it's, as soon as you get near the speaker and level with the speaker, it seems like it's testing, 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 testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. Jim Schultz. Don't pass. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Jim Schultz. Feedback everywhere. Information everywhere. Architects everywhere. Feedback everywhere. Testing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. No. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing. It is 12:09. Testing. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. My Little Pony. Discuss your commonly used IA or UX metaphors. Yeah, I can hear something arising. Eat, drink, and be merry. The field of information architecture has a rich history of sharing and community that originally stemmed.
That sounds fine. Turn off the lapel mic.
Turn it off completely.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Test, test. Testing, testing, testing. Trying to see if we get feedback. This sounds pretty good. Test, test, test. Testing, testing, testing. Test, test, test. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. Everything sounds fine. No feedback. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. How does this sound? Still sounds pretty good. Test, test, test. Feedback. Test. Sounds pretty good, I think, right? Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test.
Yeah, you're all the way
What's that? Test, test, test. Dustin, come up here. And I'm going to have you hold your button over the mute button here. So you can adjust levels if it goes feedback crazy.
Which one? Two?
Yep. Test, test, test. Walking around. Testing, testing, testing.
Are they paranoid? Is that paranoia?
Talking with the wireless microphone. No static. Walking around. Like to get really close to the audience in front of the speakers. Test, test, test. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3. Everything sounds great. Test, test, test. Like to get close to the speakers. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Let's try the other side of the room. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3. Testing, 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 testing. Presentation voice. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Everything sounds pretty good, as long as I keep it by my mouth. If I'm talking here, testing, testing, testing. How does this sound, Dustin? Did you adjust number 1? Testing, testing, testing. Try turning up the volume at number 1. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. How does it sound? Okay. Let's switch places. Otherwise, this microphone sounds pretty good. Testing. Yes. What's that? Was it muted? Yes. So let's switch places. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Everything sounds great. No interference, no static. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. As long as you keep it by your mouth. Trying to get lots of feedback.
Not a lot of people like to walk around over there. That's the problem. If they want this one. Okay. Should I turn this one off? Should I turn this one off? Okay. Audio test, 1, 2, 3. Presentation. Which mic do you want me to talk into? Not that one. Talking. Audio feedback. It sounds better down here. Keep. It's starting to hear a little bit of an echo actually now. Now that sounds better. Still talking. Closer to it? Audio test, 1, 2, reverb, better. Reverb. Audio test, 1, 2, 3. Talking into a mic. Testing, 1. Testing. Sounds fine down here.
We have to make sure no one messes with the switches. That's how the people turning off and on. And this thing is not working that well anyway, but the switch actually got designed.
Okay.
So don't mess with switches or buttons.
Okay.
Leave them on. So try it one more time. I'll try it.
Which one? Down here? Yeah, both of them. Just like tape down the dials.
Well,
Yeah, I suppose it could like do both.
switch, yeah. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Touch any of the buttons.
Oh, we just have two. So.
Yeah. Don't touch anything. Leave it alone. Leave it on, I think. I guess we'll turn this one off. But we'll turn it on.
If
Don't
people
touch
wanna walk
anything. Testing, testing, testing. Just one more time. I'm gonna turn it on. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. Yeah. So don't touch.
So, she left hers. This is yours, right?
This is mine, yeah.
Okay, so we can
I just didn't want to like.
plug this guy. I'm going to close it though. She'll come and get it.
Yeah.
So. I should know how to say my code.
This thing's a beast.
Yeah, I know. Everyone comes to meetings with little like 12 or 13
I
inches. And
know.
then
I have this like enormous. It's
It
so
works.
heavy to carry around too.
it works great. And then.
Are you going to use computer audio at all with any videos or
No.
anything?
If you want to plug that guy in, we can plug it in up here.
Oh, you can? Oh,
Yeah.
perfect.
Strip up here
This
for you.
thing sucks power pretty severely too. So
I mean, if you want to stand at the podium or walk around
I'm probably gonna stay pretty
stationary.
stationary. Yeah.
So the microphone's on, don't touch the buttons.
I heard you mention that.
Yeah,
earlier.
so I mean, it sounds pretty good, I think.
Okay.
So do you want to keep this up by you then, or just leave it down here?
I'll leave it down here because the next person wants it. I'll take it turned on.
Do you need anything else then?
I don't think so.
Clicker for the presentation, or is you're going to stand around
I'm
here?
just gonna probably stand here and hit that.
Okay.
I'm gonna keep it simple.
Cool. Be up top if you need anything.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure who that is either.
The first.
The one that's up here.
Yeah.